So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 3 of the tanks behind me and giving you some updates on them. So stay tuned to check them out. What's going on, guys? Joseph from HOplants.com here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Palludarium and the 2 cube tanks. Now, there is the other desert tank that's behind me. That's currently having some issues, but that'll be in a future video after we kind of resolve those issues, and I can give you a full kind of synopsis on what's happening. So before we get into it, if you haven't seen the builds on either the Palludarium or the 2 cube tanks, I'll link up above to each video. You can check out how we set them up initially several weeks ago. Now, there's been some issues pretty much with all 3 tanks, and I kind of wanted to show them so that way everybody out there knows that just because people, set up a tank and have them looking awesome, it's not always the case. Every tank goes through a transitional phase where you first set it up. It usually will have some sort of issue in the beginning, and then as it works its way out over time, it'll kind of sustain itself after you've corrected those issues. And usually it should kind of just be alright after that point, unless you make any major changes. So let's talk about the cube number 1. This is kind of just a overall scape that I just put together very easily with very easy beginner-friendly plants. Initially, we had a dwarf 4-leaf clover carpet in the front, or at least that's what I was going for. Unfortunately, the 4-leaf clover for this particular tank didn't work out because the light is not strong enough to really make it stay short. So it was actually kind of growing a bit taller and was really throwing off the scape that I was going for. So I opted to remove that and replace it with a new plant called stargrass. It's a plant that we've had here kind of growing. It's difficult to ship, so it's not a plant that I particularly like to ship a whole lot, but it grows really quickly and can carpet out. And so far, it's doing quite well. It's been about a week and a half, and I have to go in there, trim it down, replant the tops, and see what happens in the next week or so. But I did want to remove that carpet of 4-leaf clover because it wasn't growing, kind of perspectively, it wasn't looking right in the overall scape. And because we're bringing this tank to Aquatic Experience with us, I did want to make sure that it was looking pretty good. So for the other plants though, we've had the bucephalandrid, which has done phenomenal. It's nice and red and has some other colors to it. It looks great. The Anubis all around has been growing really good. The only thing that was giving me a bit of a problem was the giant willow moss and the bulbitis that I stuck in here. The bulbitis is still in here, but I opted to remove the giant willow moss because I felt that I didn't need it anymore. It was pretty much there just to hide the string holding the boost down, but now that that kind of blends in, it's almost not unless you know that it's there, you really won't see it. But the bulbitis is still in the tank, and I'm still having the issue that I was having with this kind of string algae. I believe it's the same type of algae that we touched on in a previous video called Spirogyra algae. It seems to be really difficult to get rid of. Currently, I'm trying some AlgaFix to see if that will treat it. I did look up Excel, hydrogen peroxide. These don't work. There is really no algae eater that will eat this type of algae. And the only thing that seems to work is AlgaFix, which I haven't seen it work just yet, but we'll see in due time. Overall, the tank has been doing phenomenal though. I just really top it off. I don't do any water changes, and it seems to be great. The algae problem is not because of that, and I do want to address that. Lots of people say, oh, well, the water changes or the light in the room because there's windows. That has nothing to do with this type of algae. It's just going to grow. There is no kind of way for me to curb whatever it is growing it because it just grows with plants. So I really just have to either chemically treat it or manually remove it, and manually remove any plants affected by it, and that would pretty much try and get rid of it at that point. But we're going to try the chemical first, see if that works, and if not, then I'll probably remove the bulbitis, maybe treat it in a separate kind of setup to really get rid of it, maybe heavily dose it with something to see if it'll kill it, and then put it back in at a later time. But that's really it. Super easy, basic, beginner aquarium, still running here, a couple of weeks long. Oh, I did actually add in a crypt also to the side of the tank here, just because it was a little empty spot. I wanted to add something with a little different color than greens and red, so it's a brown or a bronze crypt. So it'll look really cool once it really fills in and gets thick and tall, so that'll be good. And I'm still kind of thinking about adding in a background plant. There's this kind of void in the back that hasn't quite been filled yet, but we'll see in a future video if I choose to add anything to it. Next up is the moss ball aquarium. Now, we did a video on this first setup, but when we brought it, or tried to bring it to Reefapalooza in June or July there was a little rock in here that I didn't put any padding around or try and secure it in place. So what happened is we went over a bump, the rock came flying forward, it put a big old hole in the aquarium, cracked all the glass, so we actually had to order a new tank because that one was obviously shot. And I had to reconstruct everything back because it all kind of just fell apart. The thing with the cement that was held to glue these together doesn't last that long and isn't tremendously strong. At least it won't survive being in like a car ride. It typically will break apart very easily. So, you know, if the tank is stationary, it should be completely fine. But because, you know, obviously these tanks are being brought to these conventions, that it's affecting the way it's held together. So I reconstructed it. I put some new mossballs back in place because the old mossballs we had didn't quite survive. And then those mossballs that I replaced them with actually weren't doing well either. They started getting covered in algae, and I started dosing Excel to try and kill the algae, but it wound up killing the mossballs as well, or damaging them to a point where they didn't look good and I didn't feel like waiting for them to really regrow. So I just added some brand new ones in there, and there is a little bit more hair algae still growing. I'm gonna have to go back in here again and kind of trim it out and see if I can really cut down on it. Now in the background we did used to have a different plant, but a new type of plant. It's called Pogo's Diamond Octopus in the back, along with Rotala earni, which hasn't quite grown in yet, but the Pogo Diamond has been doing great. I also put a Crypt Lutea up here in the front just because there was like a little blank spot here. I figure the Crypt over time will grow in, make it look really nice. And overall the tank's doing okay. It's not the favorite of all these currently. It has a long way to go, but it's coming together. This tank will most likely be bringing with us also to Aquatic Experience this year. So I'm really excited to show it off in its current stage, and then maybe next year if we do more conventions, we'll bring them and you guys can see an update. And now on to the Palludarium. So this tank gets a lot of love on Instagram and Facebook. You guys seem to really love it. Even on here on YouTube, it's one of our most viewed videos. So after about 5 days of planting the aquarium in the very initial start, most of the plants, at least the ones that are in the water, started turning translucent. It was a weird sort of translucent. It wasn't a melting like I'm traditionally used to seeing, where the leaves kind of turn like brown and fade away. They turned to translucent, almost like a gelatin state of their existing leaves. It was something that I've never seen before. I'm almost not certain what exactly happened, but let's run through it. So the leaves on all the plants, the Anubis, the Monte Carlo, the moss, the Java ferns, all started turning this weird translucent green color. And I noticed that they weren't going to make it. They were all damaged for some odd reason. I'm not sure why. But all those leaves eventually melted off, and I was sitting there trying to figure out why that's the case. Now, the only conclusion that I can come to is the kind of framework that we put in the back of the aquarium. I think maybe the paint that I used, although I was told that it should be fine, shouldn't affect plants or fish, but I think that might have done it. I'm not entirely sure. Because in my mind, if that would have affected those plants, then it probably would have affected all the plants, because they're all utilizing the same water, which it didn't affect anything other than the aquarium plant. So I'm not entirely sure what happened. But after a couple of weeks, after I saw things starting to regrow, the Anubis started putting off new leaves, but it wasn't as good as it used to be. And the Monte Carlo started putting off new leaves, but not as much as they used to have. I decided to go ahead and replant. So I added in more Anubis, added in more plants, more Monte Carlo, more moss. I also added in some water spray and some creeping Jenny, just to kind of fill it in even more. And so far so good. It looks great from inside the aquarium, from the front view. There are a couple little tweaks that I'm going to make once we get closer to Aquatic Experience, because we're going to be bringing this tank also with us. I think this is going to be a major showpiece that a lot of people are going to love to see in person, so I can't wait to demonstrate it. But outside of the aquarium part, all the other plants are doing phenomenal. The red mangroves, which was kind of the focal point of this aquarium, is just doing great. They're growing up and out. They used to be actually at a level somewhere around here, about maybe 1/8 down in the tank, and now they're well above the water line, so now I can fill the tank all the way up and not have to worry about them being underwater. All the pond plants seem to be doing really well. They're growing really big. Also, a lot of the house plants have been doing really well, so everything on that front has been doing phenomenal. So now the only thing that we kind of have had an issue with outside of the aquarium plants has been the moss that we tried to grow on the wood. The Hydrolon fabric is wicking up moisture. It is allowing it to stay wet, but the moss really didn't take to it all that well. So what I actually am trying to do is I place the moss, instead of all the way outside the water on top of the Hydrolon, I put it in the water at the base of the Hydrolon. And what I'm hoping is that as the moss grows, it'll grow up along the Hydrolon and then eventually spread out and make it look really nice. So hopefully in time that'll spread out, but that's going to take months. It's not something that's going to be done easily or overnight. So it's going to be one of those waiting games. We'll have to see what happens. I also recently added in several stem plants around the back 2 corners, just because there wasn't really anything coming out of the sides, because there really wasn't a whole lot that I could do there. So I just kind of stuck stems down in there to see what grows. We put some Rotala Hara, some Ammonias, some Ludwigias, hygros, and some more dwarf red parrot's feather. And we'll see what grows, see what doesn't. It's all going to be up to what plants do well in the humidity in this room, because I'm not trying to convert them. Sticking them in there, see what grows, see what doesn't, and then we'll use those. But overall, all of them are growing, so if anything, we're going to have lots of bushy plants growing out from the sides. It's going to look really cool in the future. Now, ever since I did the replanting on this aquarium, there has been a little algae growing here. I am also dosing this with the algae fix to try and just eliminate it quickly. But it's nothing crazy. It actually seems to be from the flow, because I moved the output of the filter to this corner versus where it was in the back of the aquarium. So I think the flow is just a little off right now. And that's really it. I mean, this algae should clear up in probably a couple weeks and should be good to go. Everything's still growing great. The new plants that I added haven't died yet, so that's a good sign. I think whatever the issue was that we had in the very beginning has kind of worked itself out. But that's really it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of any of the tanks. What do you think that actually happened in the Palludarium that killed off the plants? Because I'd love to actually get an idea. Those plants were all growing healthy in the previous aquariums that they were in, so going into this and having them melt the way they did, very odd to me, and I still don't know entirely what happened. If you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing so by clicking the round button. If you want to see more about the aquatic experience, you could click that video, and if you want to see kind of the 1-year update to our downstairs fish room, you could click right there. And I will see you guys on the next one.